Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, everybody. Here we're going to talk about school, the source of the social ladder, and I'll introduce the people who've agreed to delve into the matter. First of all, at the far end, we have Pascal Bon-Tamares, who teaches at Aix-Marseille University, and she will be coordinating the round table. We have Léon Laloussa, Director General of the ESCP Business School in France. Then we have Ouidid Boucha Maoui, former president of the Tunisian Employers Organization, and you won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2015. Next to you, Benoit Test, teacher, Secretary General of the FSU, which is the leading trade union for education. Marguerite Bérard, director of the Commercial Bank in France, and Jean Copé, former minister, mayor LR of Meaux in Seine-et-Marne, and they will be giving us their views on this topic. I'd like to give the floor to Pascal, who is going to set the scene. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to the Cercle des Économies for having entrusted me with the coordination of this meeting, and thank you for all those who are attending this round table. The school, the driving force behind the social ladder. The social ladder is a metaphor. It's the Republican idea of the French school. It sounds good. Now, if you want to compare with the social ladder, you can ask yourself certain questions. Has it not broken down, this ladder? Has it not collapsed? Has it stopped working? It's no longer the same for all. And it doesn't seem to work for children who come from underprivileged backgrounds. So we have this round table, and we're going to be talking about sustainable development goals and education for all, not just to train an elite. Of course, a school can't do everything. It's not responsible alone for all evils. Sometimes people are asking too much of schools, perhaps. Schools, however, do embody, still today, even in the down and out areas, they embody access to a common culture. But is this culture sufficient? Is it sufficiently shared? These are questions. The school must take care of those who need schooling most, and school needs to prepare the future, giving real training to all. In the international ranking, what I've just said is reflected in these ranks, and France is not doing as well as other countries when it comes to inequalities as of birth. France is in a bad position when it comes to basic knowledge and the reproduction of social inequalities. There, in that area, the scores are very, very high indeed. Other countries seem to be managing better. Sometimes they spend less time, however, on teaching, yet they achieve better results. One might mention greater value for money. It's a question of mathematics, for example, an approach that combines science, technology, engineering, and maths, and not just maths. This approach, which is not specifically mathematical, gives better results in maths because it brings together several scientific disciplines. It highlights the importance of a scientific approach. In France, public policies draw on research, which isn't very well developed in the area of education. In other countries, people talk about evidence-based education. These political measures in France are sometimes skirted. I can give you some examples. And sometimes all these measures pile up without really tackling the system in a holistic way. For example, the training of teachers. That's not taken seriously enough, whereas teachers are doing difficult work, which is increasingly difficult as time goes by. The world has changed with digital technologies, and teachers no longer have the social rank they used to. Their profession is no longer based on the transmission of knowledge, but much more on the fact that all students sort of acquire this knowledge almost by osmosis. So this roundtable will address a major challenge which concerns society as a whole. How can we help schools to be more successful, create greater individual emancipation, to train the citizens of the future, teach students how to live together, to share the same societal ideals. We're here to share these matters together, and we'll be hearing about the expectations of society vis-à-vis the school system and what solutions, what proposals might be made in terms of initiatives that could be worthwhile in order to meet these challenges. Thank you, Pascal. I'll give the floor to Mr. Loruza, who is the Director General of the SCP. How do you deal with this idea of the social ladder in terms of schools? You're at the end of this chain in higher education. So what do you think about the future students who you now welcome? Well, thank you very much for this invitation. I'd like to share with you 3 messages and then a hope or a wish. The first message, well, I wouldn't talk about the social ladder. That bothers me. I would talk about the social staircase. Why? Because the social staircase means you have to make efforts step by step, whereas the social ladder or the social lift makes it sound as though it's really easy. No effort is entailed. In English, we talk about the social ladder. This is an interesting point of view. And also, I think that in France, often, people look at the leading schools, access to the leading schools, as a kind of elitism, whereas I think that we should actually look at our schools as a form of excellence. One has the right to make a mistake. So when I talk about the social ladder or the social staircase, you can make a mistake, yet remain excellent. Second message in terms of measures, positive measures, which you were mentioning. Personally speaking, I'm not very favorable in terms of positive discrimination. I think you can correct social biases, granted. That is something that we note. We can see that there are inequalities at the ECP Business School. For higher education, we have children with scholarship, and they have a program called Augmented Chance. It lasts for 3 days. It's free of charge, and about 50 students attend these courses to build up their confidence, and they get prepared for foreign languages and interviews. And I'll announce a scoop. We're going to be setting up the same system for high school students. We'll be experimenting with an augmented chance system, and we'll be recruiting students with grants in priority areas. We will welcome them as of the penultimate year of high school for 1 week a year so that they can succeed better, and we'll be revisiting their fundamentals like mathematics, French, foreign language, and above all, methodology. And we'll teach them how to have confidence in themselves. In terms of the wish I wanted to formulate, we all have different sensitivities. The theme today is a powerful one. It's very engaging. Why? Because the rare resource in France is the real resource is men and women. How can we ensure that we have the right resources? How can we make them extraordinary? We just have to add a little bit extra, a little something extra. So the idea is to take positive measures to ensure that, thanks to education, we have these extraordinary resources at our disposal. Thank you very much. Would you like to talk to us about the Tunisian experience, please, Oueded Bouchamaoui? As a Tunisian citizen, I'm very proud to come from a country where everything was focused on education for all. That was the challenge at the time. Give the opportunity to all children from all walks of life, give them the opportunity to have access to school. This is something that President Bourguiba did, and he created schools throughout the country in different regions, and even far away from the capital city, there are schools all over the place. That was a major challenge for a small country, which had just acquired independence. It concerned about 3 million people. Mr. Bourguiba was very motivated by 3 factors. He wanted the school to be a real social ladder. This made it possible to create elites everywhere. Children who were the children of farmers or craftsmen, they had access to the same opportunities, the same education, the same rights. Second, we trained an elite. This elite built the country. It built the country, agricultural, industrial projects, it provided for training. We were very fortunate because we were able to send Tunisian teachers to other African countries to train people and exchange this experience. President Bourguiba also set great store by the quality of education. Teachers were highly respected at the time. There was a teacher per family almost. And now the social ladder in Tunisia has broken down. It's broken down for several different reasons. First, we have opted to take in the masses at school, to have schools all over the place, whatever the quality. And unfortunately, the microphone has just gone off. So the social ladder has ceased to work in my country at present. We tried to reformulate education, but we're not making much progress. We haven't found the right measures, and a lot of entities within the country are stymieing these efforts. Currently, we need to review the entire system in order to adapt it to the job market. That's why I say we need the involvement of the private sector. As the head of a company, I think we have great responsibility. We have to share the responsibility amongst the universities, the companies. We need to give scholarships to the needy and underscore the importance of training. This social ladder should provide the requisite training at various levels, that is, train engineers, and so on and so forth. This is very important. We have the figures that prove this. The majority of the unemployed, and we have 25 to 30% of unemployed who have a university degree, and they will take on even the most menial jobs because they need to work to earn a living. That's the first point. The quality of teaching does not enable these young children from the underprivileged areas or underprivileged regions to gain access to the schools of excellence. In Tunisia, we have excellent schools, pilot schools, schools which are set aside for certain social classes. So for those that have the means, they can give their children private tuition, and that enables the children to gain access to leading schools wherever they may be. We need to revisit our system today. We need to revisit the school system, as I said, and see how we can adapt schools to the job market. Even if you're at home, you can acquire the necessary training using the internet and certain apps. These are other resources which are very suitable. I firmly believe that ongoing learning is essential if we are to continue to make progress. Thank you very much. Mr. Testa, when you were preparing your statement, you talked about the school as a social ladder, and you said that schools are based on deep inequalities. You're Secretary General of the leading trade union. Could you tell me why you said this? What doesn't work properly? Why are things so unequal? Well, schools today are very unequal in terms of their intake. It's not that they're not meeting their goals, it's that they've completely broken down. Schools are producing generations of people who are highly qualified, highly trained. We're one of the most productive countries in this area. We have a labor force which is effective, efficient. We have a democracy as well. You have to look at the indicators. What indicators do we use to measure the success of a given school? But schools reproduce inequalities. French schools can't do everything, of course. They reproduce inequalities. That should be seen against the context of spatial segregation, strong inequalities that already exist, and the schools can't manage to correct this sufficiently. We don't really like the idea of this social ladder, or even a social staircase, for that matter, because that would mean that you are you're enabling some to go up the ladder, whereas others remain at the bottom. If the aim is to have second-rate classes where you have a lot of children of white-collar workers, that's fine. You shouldn't have the richest children who go into the most prestigious departments and the poorest who are sort of relegated to the sidelines. What's most important is to say, well, why are there these sidelines, and why don't we ensure that all training, all courses bring children up to the same level? The idea is not to give the same thing to every student. The idea is to bring them up to a very high level which qualifies them and enables them to find jobs in society. So rather than talking about a staircase or a ladder, I like this idea of a sort of a passageway. And or a bridge. This doesn't exist much in the French educational system. The French educational system is based on silos. If you don't choose the right specialty, if you don't choose the right area, in order to change your decision, it's very difficult. We don't have a utilitarian vision of school, according to me. And the fact there are numerous students in sociology or psychology, whereas there aren't many jobs in these areas. Well, for us, so long as the rules of the game are clear at the outset and the students know that they may not be a psychologist or a sociologist when they graduate, so long as it's not a source of frustration, then why not? It's not necessarily an evil or a bad thing, socially speaking, for people to try out philosophy or sociology, even if it's not going to turn into their job. 1 out of 2 people is in a job that has nothing to do with the qualifications that they actually received. And for us, this is not something that is bad per se. Of course, one shouldn't make a caricature. Schools are designed to enable students to find a job. That's important. But schools should not be the only criteria. The diploma should not be the only criteria in terms of validation of people's skills and knowledge. So the idea of a social ladder, if the training is very unequal and non-egalitarian, if the idea is no longer to achieve a democratization of school, that is, share knowledge, to emancipate an entire population in an almost disinterested manner, if I may put it that way. And then in the long term, even economically, as I was saying earlier on, schools in France are training students with a very high level of knowledge, but we should look at the long term, not just the short term. One last point, the social ladder for a large part of the population, is perhaps no longer the real goal in economic terms. You have a whole new generation which is looking for meaning and the social usefulness of a profession rather than just earning a lot of money. It's very interesting to look into this in greater depth. This idea to do a job that's truly useful and not necessarily just a job that will be very prestigious. Not everyone wants to become a millionaire. Thank you very much. Madame Bérard, do schools train future employees well? Future experts who work in the banks? Do you find it difficult to recruit because there aren't enough properly trained and qualified people? Thank you very much. Well, I will try to give the viewpoint of a company in general, and I'll try to answer 3 questions. What do companies expect of schools? Can companies contribute something to schools? And can schools draw inspiration from companies? First point. I'm glad to be the second speaker. First point. What do we expect of schools? I'd like to say we expect schools to produce citizens. That is, schools should train people who are able to live in society, who know there are rights and obligations, who know that their freedom stops where the freedom of others begins. They must have consideration for their colleagues and their clients. The company doesn't necessarily expect schools to train people in technical skills. There are all sorts of things. You can be a drone operator, there are all sorts of jobs that didn't exist 10 years ago. There's some jobs where you can't find enough coders at present. Maybe this won't be the case in the future with artificial intelligence. Maybe we won't need as many coders in the future. Conversely, we need schools to train people capable of judgment, discernment, who know the difference between good and evil. Artificial intelligence is developing at a very rapid pace, so thinking for yourself is very important. That's what companies need. So these are the expectations of a company vis-à-vis schools. What can companies contribute to schools? Well, a lot. Often, companies follow on after the schools. We provide sandwich training. We have our own sandwich training center. We train hundreds of young people every year. We think that this works extremely well as a system. And companies, if schools are open, they are a window open to the world. We're the biggest employer in Saint-Denis. We welcome a lot of students as they begin their high school career. We take them to other parts of Paris so that they can see different things, so that they realize there's something apart from their down and out areas. And with associations, we have heads of company, entrepreneurs who go to the schools and ask the young people what they want to do. Often the answer is be a football player. But then a bit later, the children realize that it can be really worthwhile to work in a company. It can be very fulfilling. So, how can schools draw inspiration from companies? Don't stare at me like that. First of all, autonomy. Can a company leader help to choose collaborators, create a real training program in the area where the company has its headquarters? Do schools properly manage their talents? A top quality teacher makes all the difference, particularly when the families can't make up for sloppy teaching. Companies recruit top quality people all the time. How can we ensure that there are top quality math teachers to train students in school? There's a lot of competition because these people are often offered lucrative jobs in companies. Of course, it's exhausting to teach for your whole professional career. And if a teacher so wants, he could perhaps have a second life as a banker or something else. How can we assure that a professional, a banker, if he or she wants to, why can't that person then go and teach maths for a while? I think that could be very, very useful. Thank you very much.
Alors, Jean-François Copé, donc ancien ministre, maire de Meaux.
Jean-François Copé, former minister, mayor of Meaux. You're the politician here. You're the mayor of Meaux. What solutions might you suggest when it comes to schools in the social ladder? I'd like to say that I can't stand this school bashing anymore. This way, people in France criticize absolutely everything, including schools. And people never talk about the extraordinary successes which we have scored, thanks to heads of schools and all the players who are doing a wonderful job. And contrary to what people say, there are far more numerous than one might think, even in the difficult neighborhoods and even amongst the underprivileged. Why am I fed up? Because we are constantly harping on the same thing. We're not ranked very well in Europe. A lot of teachers feel discouraged. They don't want to continue their career. No one wants to become a teacher anymore. And there's this terrible feeling of failure, which is true. This exists, yet there are major successes as well. I'd like to react to what Marguerite and others have said. There's no point saying, oh, well, we have a new minister, we'll solve the problem. No, that's not how things work. I think there are some fundamental principles that need to be tabled and which should enable us to cope properly. First of all, instead of having a national, global, heavy vision of the way in which we should organize teaching in France, the combat unit should be the school, because each school is unique, each neighborhood is unique, and therefore the head of a school, the school director, is a key person. It's that person who's going to run the school, the primary school, the secondary school. He's going to be the one-man band who can apply a project which is suitable for the students who go to his or her school. That is the fundamental issue. It's the school which is the linchpin of what we need to do. I'm talking about all schools, and over the years I've seen school directors who succeed and who have launched a sports project, a theater, or a cultural or a scientific project, and have scored huge successes. Second point, we have to totally rethink the way we consolidate teachers in their career. Marguerite is quite right. These teachers can't continue in this manner. Teachers are all by themselves. The conditions are deplorable. They're very vulnerable in terms of authority. Just think about the endless tales of teachers who tried to be a bit severe. They ended up with recalcitrant students and aggressive parents. It's simply not possible. This cannot go on. We have to rethink the training of these teachers, rethink probably both the beginning of their career and their overall professional pathway. Nobody's doing this, I'm sorry, Mr. Test, because unfortunately we have a very egalitarian vision of things, which is the greatest enemy when it comes to reducing inequalities. You cannot have the same project or the same teaching staff. You can't have the same school director if you're in a privileged city center or in a rural area or in an underprivileged area. You have to have people who are deeply engaged and who are evaluated. That's another dirty word. You have to evaluate the results, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. In the Anglo-Saxon world, if you fail, it's an opportunity. In France, you're covered with opprobrium. The same applies to both teachers and students. Second thing, the students. One last thing, each child is unique. Each child should be considered for what he or she is. So let's rethink the educational model of the 21st century. There's a lot of stiff competition. We have the social networks, video games, artificial intelligence. We have to rethink the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel. So what do I mean? I think there are three goals. First of all, actual teaching, pedagogy. Of course, we have to teach people how to learn with a critical frame of mind. That's what's wonderful when it comes to training people's minds. You have this Cartesian line of reasoning. You have to teach people about thesis, antithesis, how to criticize things, view things in a critical light. Second thrust, individual pathways. Each child needs support. I can guarantee that cities are sinking a lot of money in individual support. When a child has difficulties, we are there to help. There's a lot of support that's available at schools. That's vital. Third point, collective teaching. Group teaching. Each child in a class should show solidarity with his or her pals. If he's better at something, he should help his pal, and if he's not as good, his pal should help him out. And when you see what we saw last week, behind all this, there's this incredible violence. And behind all this, again, you have the last pillar of the system, the parents. There are parents who don't shoulder their responsibilities. Nobody reminds them of their rights and responsibilities of parents. This crazy idea, according to which there is an eternal truth. When you're poor, you are the parents of violent children. That's not true. You can be very poor, and your children can succeed very well when it comes to education because you're responsible and because you bring them up properly. These are essential topics. These are not. These are methodological reforms that we could bring at the beginning of a presidential term of office in the summer. You do this during the summer before people have come back on holiday, and then this should be able to work quite well. That's why I think that in all these respects, we need to take account of the things which have been diagnosed years ago, and we just have to put things in place. I'd like to repeat this once again. Each child is unique, each child is important, and obviously for each child we have to plan a custom-made pathway. Thank you very much.
Donc vous l'avez compris.
Thank you, Jean-François Copé, who wants to relieve what we call the mammoths, or give more autonomy to the school, to the heads of schools, and to the teachers who have to somehow review their methods. We're going to start with a freer discussion, maybe. I wanted to ask Mr. Test what he feels about what Mr. Minister just told us. Well, I'm not going to go on holiday in Larzac if the Republicans start a 5-year mandate, because I do understand that they're preparing for some projects. It's a speech that we've heard again and again, which is perfectly consistent, but we've been saying this for 30 years. Next year we have what is called the Teaching Compact to organize projects, and other people do not have this additional remuneration. These are things that are developed that haven't solved the situation, because we don't feel that having something that is national is not necessarily heavy. It's not an idea of equalitarian, it's the idea of having something in common. The school of Jules Ferry was there to build the Republic, to share all the Republican values with the whole population. The idea was that there were several types of teaching, but the issue of autonomy of the various establishments and schools are something that we look at in the field of missing freedom when you want to have a project. It's next. For the teams to take the initiative, As we said, you have to break the taboos. It means you have to remunerate the most motivated people. It means you have everybody that is competing with everybody. We don't think it would be a good thing, and it's not a good thing for the teachers or for the students. And when we talked about having passageways, I believe we need something in common. We need to have the same thing everywhere, same objective everywhere. It's not being equalitarian. The policy of support or aids doesn't mean being equalitarian. It means giving more to some people to reach the same objectives. The issue with the liberal speech is that the objective itself is reviewed downwards in some places, and there is no longer an equal objective. I'm not going to start a polemic, but I know that as soon as we talk about something being liberal, we seem to have solved the problem. But the thing is that we're not that far away from each other. We're not using the same means, but we're all aiming at the same objective, the same goal. But we all understand one thing: you shouldn't use the same means everywhere, because you have different ways, different journeys, and each area and each population requires a different strategy. I'm not talking about having competition between the establishments, as you said. It's not the issue. The idea is to have each establishment adapting its projects to the population it receives, and this without any taboo. Some children do not necessarily have the luck of having the right family support despite the efforts of the parents. So the idea is to give them this little added support that they wouldn't get elsewhere. And this is a deeply Republican objective. Well, there is an example that is pleading in that along those lines, is the dividing the classes in two in the more popular areas. Well, this was a uniform policy. It was transparent. Yes, but we started from something that was supposed to be limited to a few areas, and that is being extended because it's bearing its fruit. Pascal Brand-Pomarez will correct me if I'm wrong. Would you like to add something? Yes, talking about that, this is a measure, an action that has to be assessed to see the result. Yes, we've had 4 years of experience now. Yes, but there were other actions that were being introduced when in the past, that we're giving some flexibility in the schools, as Mr. Copé would like to have, so that some teachers could be in one class at a time and then in another class at another moment. And we would get rid of the taboo of one teacher, one class, one teacher who is isolated, alone, and coming back to the idea that all these actions should have to be to last overall, so that we don't end up with piling up of actions that do not help. Let's not feed the mammoths, as is said. Let me give the floor to the audience. First of all, here. Hello? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your interventions. I have 3 observations in the form of a question, very quickly. First of all, I'd like to know the position you give to the départements, because if you look at the latest academic research, it has shown that in France, the main issue we have is not mainly on the basic issue of French, math, or foreign languages, but the issue is mainly to develop self-confidence, for example, and there is a bias there. And second observation, the efficacy of the priority educational areas. I heard that you're saying it's efficient. I don't know who has said that, but the economist Roland Benabou has shown that the reduction of the number of pupils per class can help improve the results. But in France, it wasn't so, because the number was not very much reduced because we wanted to apply it in too many places. Well, you're right, and that's why I talked earlier about the augmented chances, because very often children are applying self-censorship. 2 years ago, we started a digital passport on aptitudes and behaviors and competencies, so that our students have a blockchain certification system to check their behavior. With Marie Béra, we were talking about respect, and this is Marguerite Béra. It's very important to develop what the Anglo-Saxons call the soft skills. Yes, lately we observed that police is not enough to pacify a society, which is why schools have a great role to play. So, but the school needs its means. Thank you, Mr. Copé, for paying tribute to the teachers. I would like to test what you said. You talked about training and a lot of reforms. We're not in the world of ideas and abstract ideas. We're talking about something very practical and means. And to find the means, would you be in favor of increasing the minority, the taxes of a minority that has been so much protected over the past? If this were to solve the problems, I would be ready to do it, but I have my doubts. I believe that the topic is not just an issue of increasing the taxes of a protected minority, but the fact is that the taxes of everyone, including the richest, are properly used. But there's a lot of losses on the way, including in the national educational system. You're saying I'm not sincere. I may disagree with you and still be sincere. Yes, you have to respect everybody's position, sir. Jean-François Copé, you wanted to come back to the areas of priority education. I'm personally in favor of that, because whatever represents a plus in those areas, if there is an assessment afterwards, I'm in favor of that. But you need to assess the results, otherwise it's no use. Thank you. Another question? Yes. Someone asked what is the position of companies in education, but I have another one. What is the position of associations in education? Because to me, national education is not open enough to popular education. How can we, with the popular education, carry a project for society? Associations that are here when the school is not there should also be there when school is there. Who wants to answer this question about school time and out of school time? Well, if I can talk about the Tunisian experience, in Tunisia, children spend more time at school than at home. So their training should be given to teachers and to children and parents as well, because we can see in the Scandinavian countries where there is no competition with the examinations and throughout the years, but they have a lot of artistic activities so that children can develop, and it helps parents participate. This is what I mean. Schools should be open to the city, to civil society, and this is how you can have something new. You cannot organize your programs and curricula if you do not involve the parents and the youngsters. So if we talk about about school that is not keeping children sufficiently and being open to the rest of society. Well, it's also the way in which the rest of society is open to school and its function. I agree with what Mrs. Bouchamaoui just said. The society project is not that of the school or corporations, but that of the whole society. And we need more interpenetration, more exchanges to develop culture. When the children from Aulnay-sous-Bois go to the Louvre for the first time because school is taking them there, I think it's a great thing. When in Marseille, the association called Le Grand Bain enables schools to twin a school in the poorer areas and in the more developed areas, then it's a great thing. And I think that schools should help talents and initiatives. But for all that, you need the means to give those who need most. Because when you go to the Louvre with your parents, you don't need to go there with your school. And this is one of the issues. I was wondering how you can get organized so that companies penetrate the world of education as soon as possible, and how that can make sense, and how we can fight, in practical words, the discrimination. Because when you start in companies and you're discriminated, then it's no use. I'm an expert in that field. I work in that area, and if you don't do that, it won't be any use. I perfectly agree with you. We need a link between schools and companies. When we go to the schools, we're invited over by the teachers, and this is great, and it works both ways. Sometimes our colleagues organize mentoring for activities for the pupils, but there are codes. For example, the code of how you go to an interview. How do I get to the job interview on time? When I get to the job interview, I should wait until I'm asked to sit down. And there are codes, and these are things that we can explain via mentoring activities, via supporting activities. And we can see this with our colleagues. There's a huge appetite, a huge desire of people in the companies, because they may be parents or grandparents. They have a huge desire to give time to to organize that kind of action, and it helps fight stereotypes, because sometimes the mentoring is not on the side you would imagine it is. Thank you. I have a simple question. For 30 years, we've all said and realized there's a problem in national education. We have trainings that do not lead to anything. We have a lot of master's diplomas, where instead of BTS, which are practical diplomas and which lead to better results, we have teachers who know earlier what they want to do. Where does it work in terms of what is going wrong? I want to have two opinions, that of Jean-François Copé and that of Benoît Test. Well, Jean-François, very quickly, in my opinion, the first reason is that there is still a Berlin Wall, so to say, between people. I believe that between the economic world, the corporations and the schools, it should be perfectly smooth. And you see it when you go to professional schools. They speak more spontaneously with their children about the relationship to companies than they do in the general educational system. So we must have a more smooth passageway. It must be more fluid, and we should have less partitioning. We still have preconceived ideas about this. And I believe there are two things. First of all, we don't tell the children enough. Okay, you have a dream. The role of school is to help you analyze your dream. As I was saying earlier, we're not here to train millionaires. Well, why not? If a child wants to dream to become a millionaire, why not? I don't know what will come of it, but the idea will be, okay, in Great Britain, in other countries, they tend to ask less of the children, but to give them more freedom as to their dreams and projects. And secondly, the thing that is very important is self-confidence. It's not because you have a bad mark in your math exam that your life is over. The child must be able to show what they can do, and this will help them become self-confident. And the idea of having a class that gives a round of applause to the child when he gets somewhere, that's great. Well, Benoit Test. Well, this self-confidence, I perfectly agree. Sorry to be so consensual, but now the position of companies, obviously, things have to be done properly, and you must have competencies that are transferable. The idea is not to look at things in silos, but I don't know what's going wrong. Yeah, that was your question. Sorry to say this because it sounds very much trade unionist, but I guess it's the investment in education that means the proportion of money devoted to education has dropped in the past few years. It's not true that we give enough means to education. So creating passageways, having an ambition for professional high schools would be great. It would enable to make headway and to talk about priority education areas. There's a report of the national auditors that said that it's a kind of buffer. We're reaching the end. One last question. Hello, everyone. I come from the northern areas of Marseille, the so-called difficult areas. I just finished the North High School, and I'm at the head of the Final office, which is one of the top lawyers' office in France, and I still live in that same areas every day. I go to the office which represents an elite, but I go back home, and every day I pass my college, my former college. Where is the social project? Where is the project for our society? Every day when I pass that school, I wonder about that. So, Mr. Lalausa, 1 minute. We all agree you have to create a desire, a passion. When Marguerite, one action we have, you know, when children get to the third grade in high school in France, the group of children go to companies and they look at the projects for a year. And I can tell you that that creates a desire, and then they are passionate. They want to learn. You have to learn to learn. You have to create the desire to learn and the curiosity. And curiosity goes mainly through companies. Well, we have seen that this topic is a topic which people find fascinating, but I'm not sure that the conclusions are sufficiently shared to say that there is one solution. It seems that the solution is not something that can be found easily or that is found by one group. It's something that must be transversal and cross-sectoral. We need a possibility for the youngsters in this area to reach their dreams and to go as far as possible, as far as they can. And this might be the limitation of the egalitarian system. We must think that everyone must be able to make headway, and we must help everyone to make headway. And as to that, there are still some taboos, and all the actions taken, including by ministers or people coming out of the northern areas of Marseille, all these actions can be blocked because there are really some barriers and some nodes. One, as I heard from you, is self-confidence. In some countries, you get ranks from the moment you succeed. In France, the ranking, you have ranks that goes from 1 to 10. So before you get to a successful note or mark, or the marking from 0 to 20 is a taboo. There are 10 notes for when you're not successful. And also the fact that a math teacher can be recruited through a competition, and if they want to change their career, if they want to develop, they have to go to Paris, wherever they took their examination. And this is not very attractive for them. We would have to adjust things so that the aspirations of the pupils, but of all the citizens, are more taken into account. And this is why I agree with the idea of a social project or a project for a society. Thank you all. Obviously, we weren't exhaustive enough. Sorry, we weren't able to take all the questions. We didn't reach a consensus, but we had a nice debate. Thank you.
Oui. Oui, bonjour, merci de vous asseoir rapidement. On va commencer.
Could you please take your seat? We're going to start shortly. We have 1 hour to explore democracy. It's a vast topic, the new paths of democracy, and it's a very topical issue, at least in France. I'd like to introduce our speakers and the panel, and then we'll begin the debate. On my right, Chloé Morin. You were an advisor to the Prime Minister, and you work at MSOS, and you have a company currently. Johanna Vertianen. You are the mayor of Helsinki. You're an economist in a preceding life. You're still an economist. Okay. Eliana Santos. You are Franco-Congolese. You define yourself as a civic entrepreneur. And you have created an incubator of public policy, Je m'engage pour l'Afrique. Mr. Abdel Ali, you're a journalist, a politician, editor-in-chief of Al Bawaba newspaper. You're a specialist in the Islamist movement, and you also have given great thought to the link between democracy and religion. And Marie-Lise Léon, you are the new president of the CFDT. You had some troubled beginnings at the CFDT with the reform of the retirement scheme in France, and you can talk about social democracy. And Vincent Pons, who is the moderator and economist, a professor at Harvard in the US, best young economist this year, and you specialized in voting, abstention, and why people abstain. You'll be introducing the debate, and then we'll hear from our speakers. Thank you very much, Isabel. Thank you to you all for having joined us for this session on the new paths of democracy. We called this session in this manner because democracy currently has reached a sort of dead end. Historically speaking, we're at a point in time where after 2 centuries and 2 waves when countries have become democracies, now democracy is receding. Look at countries like Turkey, Hungary, India, where rights are thwarted. Look at the elections in Turkey. The opponent to Erdogan had 50% less TV time than Erdogan, and democratic institutions have become weakened. What's even more preoccupying is that when you look at the oldest democracies in the world, the most robust ones, like in France and the US, we also note a certain number of weaknesses, the drop in the number of people voting, mistrust of elected people, the rise in populist votes, and the role of the social movements. So it's not just a political issue. When democracy is not doing well, it's the whole of growth or economic activity that's threatened. The link between democracy and economic activity is obvious. When you're in a context where there's a lot of mistrust of elected people, it's very difficult for these elected people to implement reforms and have a serene debate on policies. When there's a risk of a populist party, an extremist party being voted in, then this can lead to something like Brexit or what have you. The problem is that we're at a loss in the face of these threats and these growing cracks in democracy. The trends I've noted, the drop in participation, these trends date back to the 70s, in fact. These are phenomena that don't just affect France, but most democracies in the Western world. We sense that there are deep-seated causes to these trends, and democracy per se is an exercise where you delegate decision-making power to tens of thousands of citizens, so it's difficult to identify remedies. Yet we're going to focus on remedies here at this roundtable discussion. What are the possible remedies so that democracy can do better? Can we hope that the solution is in the offing? Do we need new public policies? Is it elected people who should reinforce democracy? Should it be companies that do so? So I'd like to open the debate, and we're awaiting concrete answers from each and every one of you to these various questions. Marie-Lise Léon will be our first speaker. She is a trade unionist at the CFDT. How do you view this social democracy, which seems to be sorely lacking over the last few months? How can one improve it? What can one do to go further currently? Well, that's a vast program. Hello, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm not an economist, and I hope that you won't hold that against me. I believe that it's good to have different views. Indeed, that's one of the best ways to find the right answer to a problem. I like this idea of the new paths of democracy in the title. There's no miraculous remedy. I think we have to put together all sorts of solutions that we need to think about as a group. And before answering the question, I would like to reaffirm here the following. Democracy is important for a trade unionist and for trade unionism in general. There can be no emancipation, solidarity, equality without democracy. And I can bear witness to this. Indeed, it is necessary to defend democracy when cooperating with militants from other trade unions, be they in Europe or abroad. When democracy becomes weak, becomes fragile or disappears, then trade unionism also disappears. And these two things are closely bound up together. I might give you a global answer to the question, and then I'll go into some details. My organization believes that democracy is less sick because of its institutions than the way the institutions actually work. I'll therefore focus on three remedies. And there is a demand that my organization applies to itself. I'm talking about the CFDD. The remedy is the following. We have to look at the frame of mind in terms of democracy. Democracy is not a daily exercise. It's a special frame of mind. You have to agree that there can be no democracy without comparing ideas, without holding a debate, without respecting the different players, and without looking for lasting compromises, which will make it possible to build or work for the general interest, the interest of society at large. So it's a general mindset. Of course, universal suffrage is not the same as absolute legitimacy. It is absolutely necessary to give legitimacy to decisions taken by politicians. When it comes to the frame of mind that I'm trying to describe, one has to recognize there are many different players. One has to accept counterpowers, checks and balances, the sharing of power on a national level, and in companies as well. And I'll talk about that later on. I also believe that over and beyond these ethics when it comes to power, there isn't just one democracy. There are different kinds of democracies. There are different players. There are numerous players who lend life to democracy, representative democracy, political democracy, social democracy. I think that everyone has a part to play. Everyone can be useful, and we have to think about the links between the individual players and all these kinds of democracies. One has to rethink these links. We truly need to take account. How can I put this, says the speaker? I think we often forget when discussing representative democracy, we often forget the millions of people who are represented by the players. And the players in any social democracy or trade union democracy, of course, one shouldn't talk about the organization, one should talk about the people one represents, the thousands of people one represents. I'm speaking on behalf of the workers I represent who voted for me. We also have 650 million members of the union. I've referred to the responsibility of the different players as well. I believe that democracy shouldn't stop at the doors of a company, the economic entities. You have to consider workers as a whole person, and you need to have places for expression and dialogue at work, at the workplace. That's also important in public administrations. We need to have good social dialogue, a proper economic, social, and environmental dialogue in all these strategic places, like administrations and companies. And people also talk about being able to talk openly at work. That was one of the things that was mentioned when reforming the pension scheme. Of course, things tend to focus on the 64-year age limit, but in the demonstrations, people were saying they want to get greater appreciation for the work done. They want to live better off their work. Thank you. Mr. Abdelrahman Ali, I think you have a lot of experience of fighting for democracy and human rights in a country where it's not always easy. You strongly defended religious minorities. So, democracy in Egypt, what are the solutions there?
Today, but unfortunately I will speak by Arabic because I have to be very clear in this dangerous moment in France and in some areas in the world. شايف حد معاه سماعات.
Ouais, le problème c'est que
I hope you all have headsets so you can listen to what I'm going to say.
si vous pouviez amener des écouteurs pour les gens, voilà.
I'm sorry about this.
Ah bah d'accord, ok.
Ah,
Ouais.
Very nice. Very good. Very good. Very good. Very good. Very good. Very good. سعيد جدا بالتواجد معاكم.
Très heureux d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Merci.
يبدو ان اليوم سأسبح ضد التيار.
Il paraît aujourd'hui que je vais
I would like to say that I will take a different stance from many people. I'm not going to talk about democracy per se. I'm not going to talk about fragile democracy. Fragile democracy, in my view, I'm talking about my experience, which is a lengthy one. I have studied Islamist movements for a long time. We've seen that some democratic societies have created a certain confusion because they have enabled these movements to penetrate our societies and impose their views. In my view, that's the great danger facing Europe and democracy in Europe and in France in particular. We all noted a few weeks ago that there were very sad events. Why? Because there was a lack of respect of the values and principles which form the basis of democracy in our countries. I'm talking about freedom of expression and freedom of belief. The values of democracy, liberalism, and equality above all. I'm not talking about the Islamic religion as per se. I am a Muslim. I'm not talking about the Arabs as a nation. And I'm not talking about the immigrants in France, because the immigrants in France, well, France gives us freedom and equality. I'm talking about something that I want to draw your attention to. I've been studying these movements for over 40 years. I talked about the kidnapping of certain universities. We have people who steal the brains of these immigrants, and people are using a fragile democratic system in their country to transform it. And they turn these migrants' brains into puppets. We have already tried a number of solutions in our country. We often talked about the Arab Spring. This Arab Spring was never an experience designed to advance democracy in the country. It was a tactic which aims to destroy the country from within. I lived this time in detail. France nearly experienced the same thing just a few weeks ago. I saw with my very own eyes the terror of the French men and women and children. Friends weren't able to leave home throughout this period because there was a true reign of terror. It wasn't a demonstration, what was happening. I can confirm this to you. We'll see what happens in a few years' time. Be it in France or in Europe, even worse things may happen in the future compared with what happened in the last 10 days. There are other events which are planned in order to kidnap these brains. For half a century, people have been hard at work at this, and politicians must be very careful. There should be restrictions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Elena Santos, you're Franco-Tongolese. You believe in democracy, you believe in citizens' participation, and particularly young Africans. You're quite positive. What, according to you, are the solutions? You said that you were a bit upset to see there aren't many places where young people can express themselves today, discuss things, and receive the requisite training. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be with you this afternoon. As you said, I'm Franco-Togolese. This gives me an opportunity to view the two continents, there's two geographical areas. I was born in Togo and I came to France for my studies. That's my background. For me, democracy is responsibility. It is also mobilization. What I mean is that we are all concerned. And if we're not happy, if things don't suit us, then I believe in the fact that it's up to us to do something about it. Young people, of course, young people today are faced with many challenges, climate change, the economy. And it's up to us to explore these new paths of democracy, just to quote the title of this meeting. We have the tools to do this, the will to do it. I'd just like to remind you of a few figures. In Africa today, 60% of the population is under the age of 25. In 30 years' time, by 2050, 35% of young people in the world will be African. And obviously, one can wonder how we can create this democratic space in Africa and also throughout the world. Just 3 points why I want to become deeply engaged. First of all, this distended link between institutions and citizens. The second reason for becoming engaged is that I noted a lot of energy and we need to turn this energy into concrete action. I'll answer the question put earlier on. I think in particular in Africa, we have to focus on young people. The Côte d'Ivoire, for example, today, focus a lot on young people in terms of employment, training. And I believe that it's very important today if each young person is to participate in the public debate. For me, that's the first point, which is of capital importance. We have to really place our bets on youth. Second point, which is dear to my heart, how can we reinvent democracy? I see all over the place new modes of action, new ways of becoming engaged for a given cause. One can support a coalition. Many people want to become engaged à la carte, in hybrid mode. And likewise, the idea is to find the requisite answers. Currently, Professor Achille Bembe launched the Foundation for Innovation for Democracy in Africa. This is an initiative supported by Africans for Africans. The idea is to train and provide financial support to these people who are so energetic in this area, and multiply the number of areas for dialogue. In France, you have many people who come from the diaspora. We are dual nationals, and we have a role to play. We can teach the good practices that we find on one or other of the continents. And there's the last thing, which for me is a remedy and we need to work on. We have all these new technologies. There are good sides and bad sides to new technologies. You have fake news, for example. In Kenya, a few years ago, they managed to secure the elections through the blockchain. So these are innovations, and I believe we can draw inspiration from these good practices. So in sum, what I want to say is that we need to place our bets on youth, place our trust in youth. Another concrete example, for example, is that I believe in young public-private partnerships. I think we should delegate missions to young people so that you can tell me what you think about it, so that they can create a local mission in their place where they live, for example. We need to create these spaces, these tools, where everyone can find his or her rightful place. There are many people who are engaged, Alexandre from Marseille, you, Ernest. We have lots and lots of people who are engaged on a daily basis. I'd like to congratulate all these young people. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Thank you. You said earlier on that it was complicated, Johanna Vartianin, for democracies and for welfare states. Given globalization and the circulation of populations, the strong waves of migration, democracy is deeply threatened across Europe. I wouldn't say it's deeply threatened, but it's true that there is a crisis. For a long time, economists, technocratic economists like me, for example, we thought that the Northern European system, with a strong market economy combined with a welfare state, high taxes, lots of public services, we thought that that would be sufficient, it would be the right solution. It's capitalism, granted, but the idea is to share the prosperity generated by the market economy. We've seen that perhaps this may not be sufficient, however, in recent years. A lot of the current problems can be traced back to the demographic challenge, in fact. The welfare states in the north of Europe were designed at a time where we didn't need to think about demographics. The workforce continued to increase over the years. We could keep creating new services, new benefits, and so on. Now, the demographics go in the opposite direction. So we need a lot of fiscal discipline. We need to welcome immigrants in order to fill labor shortages. And that has created a lot of political malaise. It's tough in terms of unemployment insurance. We have to remove certain services instead of increasing them. And the workers' movement has increased its demands. There are more and more right-wing nationalist parties. In many countries, like in Denmark and the UK, the employment market, the labor market is working well. We need simple, technical, pragmatic solutions. I'm not saying that I have the miracle solution, but one thing I've been thinking of since I've been mayor, I've been mayor for the last 2 years. Prior to that, I was a general economist. As a mayor, you have to think about local democracy, how the local community works. You have to look at town planning. How should we design our countries? There's a lot of malaise in France. There have been riots and violence. A lot of these phenomena can be explained owing to these segregated northern districts where you only have immigrants and a certain group of people. In Sweden, huge low-cost housing units in the 60s and 70s were built for poor Finnish immigrants at the time. And in France, the same thing took place at the time of Le Corbusier. Well, Le Corbusier denoted great progress. However, we have created highly segregated neighborhoods in the outlying areas of towns. I have a very modest solution to propose. In our city, in Helsinki, we're trying to mix the population instead of having these segregated neighborhoods. We're trying to mix together the rich and the poor. That's how we're trying to plan our city. We want to have buildings where you have owner-occupants next to buildings where you just have tenants who receive a subsidy from the city or the state. We want to avoid at all costs any form of segregation in the city. It's not easy, of course, because people in open societies can move to live wherever they want. You can't be dictatorial. But when you draw up a plan for public spaces, one can have a lot of influence on the structure of society. And I believe that this is a very simple solution we could put forward. It's quite a practical, quite a simple solution, which might remedy this malaise which runs deep and is deeply ingrained in society today.
But it's not only true for Finland, it's also true for France. Thank you for these words. It sounds simple, but it's very complicated. Chloe, we just talked about the actors of democracy, the citizens, but you're talking about the politicians in your book. You are saying they need help, they are threatened, they are sick, their functions, no one else wants to exercise these functions anymore. Yes, you cannot talk about democracy if you don't talk about the people who activate it. And I'm not talking about only the citizens, but the elected authorities as well. But we know that these elected authorities are citizens, but the image of their function is more and more deteriorated. And the conditions in which they exercise their functions are being deteriorated. If you are locally elected, it means you are ill paid for the time you spend helping others. You are submitted to a tyranny of transparency. You have to render accounts. You have to be accountable as to what your children do, what your companion does. And some of them are ill-treated. We've seen that with the mayor of l'Île-aux-Roses recently. They've been submitted to a lot of violence. And each elected authority receives almost on a daily basis some insults. But nevertheless, we need these people. We need them to make the decisions. We need the function to remain attractive, so as to have competent people, people who come from all fields of society, people who are connected and representative of what society can be. And at one point or another, we need to ask ourselves about the attractiveness of the function as an elected authority. Some elements are extremely positive elements have been introduced over the past 10 years to maintain the transparency of public life. The higher authority of public life is enabling now to approach the revenues, for example, of deputies, which wasn't the case in the past, but there are other elements that are negative. We have to think about the remuneration of these elected authorities, for example, the mayors of villages or cities from 1,000 to 50,000 inhabitants. They're not the same at all as what that person would be paid if they worked in a company, private company. And also, this has deprived the parliament of part of the people who made its diversity. And once again, there are good and bad elements. When a judge challenges a political decision that should be sanctioned by citizens, it is a malfunction of democracy. we must also think about the usefulness of the publication of people's revenue, non-revenue. It's okay to make sure that people are not getting richer through their functions, but is it useful for us as citizens to know what is the brand of their car, or whether they have a holiday house in Brittany? And also, you have some professional elected authorities that are therefore cut off from society because they just hang on to their mandate and are no longer connected to real society. And we must absolutely apply the sanctions against the people who exert violence against these elected authorities, because sometimes now they complain in court, they go to the police, sometimes they don't even do it anymore because nothing is done to protect them. And when you attack a mayor, for example, you're attacking the citizens they represent, and it's absolutely not acceptable. Thank you. Two things we might pick up before we give the floor to the audience. First of all, the issue of the welfare state, which is very interesting. Marie-Lise Léon, do you have a feeling that our democracy since 1945, after the National Compact created after the war in 45, is being threatened by by immigration, by all these new movements? Answer no. Well, very quickly I will say no. I think there are geopolitical tensions, different cultures, different societal projects with different visions of the world that are being confronted. And each side wants to impose to the others a given vision of an economic or democratic model or a social model. Now, this being said, we can defend the position of the state and the democracy by being open, especially inside our country, to the existence of democracies that need to articulate together. And giving this space, this intermediate space, means a reinforcement of democracy. And it might sound counterintuitive, but it's a way of reinforcing or strengthening the state. I was hearing about the upheavals and the need to strengthen social cohesion, but social cohesion to a large part rests on social stakeholders, social actors, people from civil society, associations, who represent this social cement, social link, and who need to be supported, comforted, and listened to. I believe that historically it is true that the welfare state, at least in the Nordic countries, was a result of globalization, because international free trade led to prosperity but also to uncertainty. And it means that people need to have a social security and social reassurance. But welfare state is threatened by democracy, because we will not have enough to fund all the public services with a great number of pensioners. Well, you were talking about what we call intermediate bodies, but very often in France you feel that you have the lower democracy, that of the trade unions, etc., but they have trouble talking to the democracy of the top, so to say. How did you feel that? How did you go from these discussions to political decisions from the top? Well, with Je m'engage pour l'Afrique, we want to get public policies that will lead to an excellent and well-performing Africa. I believe that the first thing you need are social media. How can you get the topic to emerge? The issue is to see how youngsters can take the floor. To me, it's important to create a path that works. But there's a lot of decisions being mentioned, but they don't usually come to fruition. So it's important to know who does what in the administrative system, because if you don't understand that, you won't know who you have to talk to, whom you should congratulate when you need congratulating someone. And in my opinion, when a citizen is committed, they need to get results for the community they're working for. So there's a need to really get to practical results. Chloe, in your previous book, you used to talk about political authorities who had trouble applying the political decisions because they were prevented by an extremely heavy administrative system. Would you say this is the issue? Yes, overall, when political authority announces something, and between that moment and the moment when it has a practical impact on the life of people, there's a huge deadline, and this obviously changes the decision. This time changes the decision and changes the vision that people have of the actual decision, because the results are lessened. But there is indeed a responsibility for political authorities, that of executing the decisions. I believe that a lot of them don't spend enough energy, enough time to make sure that the decisions are actually being implemented, because we have to be very careful about how law comes into place, how it is implemented, and in my opinion, this should take at least 90% of the time of these people, and it's not the case today. So I'm going to turn to the room for questions. Please, questions, not declarations, just questions in one sentence, so we can take as many as possible. Thank you. My question is quite easy. When you look at the figures concerning abstentions in the elections, one can wonder whether the problem is more citizens. It's easy to say all political authorities are rotten, but that's an easy answer and it may not be the actual problem. Who wants to answer that question about democracy is in the hands of citizens and it's for them to go and vote? Well, there's a huge responsibility of political authorities in the mistakes they made, but saying that they're all rotten is wrong. It's statistically, you have to know that most of the political authorities are not the ministers you see on TV, but the elected people who work in the various areas locally, and not voting is a way of not facing your responsibilities as citizens. I would like to remind you of the work, a very interesting note written by Vincent Pons in the file of Les Rencontres. Question. I wanted to turn to Mrs. Léon concerning a question on globalization. Personally, I have trouble believing that globalization is not a barrier, especially for the workers, because when you talk about relocation, about the migrant population that enables a reduction of the wages, this is not necessarily going in the right direction for French workers. I wanted to know why you don't think that globalization may be a problem for workers and for their rights. Okay, thank you. Globalization and social democracy, that's the question. Well, I believe that globalization may have brought a lot of progress in many countries and has helped some populations benefit from some social progresses. Now, it all depends on the way you regulate things. It's absolutely necessary to have the right tools, which may be different in 2023 than what they were in 2010 or in 2000. Globalization has changed. It has multiple faces, multiple aspects. But this is one of the challenges, one of the top challenges of international trade unions is to work against hidden work. When you take on an international vision as a trade unionist, you have to look at the reality of some other countries where things are extremely different from what they are in our country. And we may be involved in solidarity actions or in funding or helping and supporting trade unionists because they are threatened with a death sentence, for example, in some countries. So this has to be looked from the angle of the regulations that can be introduced and the tools that can be used. One of the tools we've been working on at length in 2017 in our trade union was the duty of vigilance. It's a form of international solidarity. How can we, in corporations, for example, identify the responsibility of the project owners and the subcontractors? It was the drama of Rana Plaza with the workers and the textile workers, where they were manufacturing T-shirts for French brands in disastrous conditions. Yes, and this law worked rather well for the textile industry. Yes, it did. The economic world yelled in 2017, saying it was a scandal having to regulate this type of connections. They said that a French company had no means to check the impact of what they did with the best of will. But we managed to convince the political stakeholders, and now those people who used to criticize are now saying at European level how happy they are that France was at the root of these regulations. I have a question about democracy in general. We talk a lot about democracy as a system to be reached, but don't you think we're not seeing democracy as an ideal thing? We can try to explain this by saying that democracy is a value, but do you think that it should be an objective to impose democracy everywhere? Don't you think that we're looking at democracy with rosy lenses, really? Well, it might be the topic of a roundtable next year. Well, in 1 minute, I must say that we should export good models, and to me, democracy means responsibility and mobilization, making sure that things work, especially for the African continent. What I'm interested in is, do we manage to give jobs to those who need them? At the end of the day, can everybody have access to health care? And this is a priority for our youth, which is the future of our continent. We could spend hours saying this or that system is good or bad, but that's not the idea. The idea is to see that everyone should be able to find their right position in society. Thank you. Yes, it is interesting because we see this model is being challenged in many southern countries. So maybe I can ask our president to conclude this. Well, it's a bit frustrating because we didn't identify any miracle solution, but it seems that we need to involve citizens more in the democratic system, and we should try to encourage some of them to become candidates, encourage elected authorities to ask for new mandates, and we have to look at the status of these elected authorities. Many of you talked about the central role of debates or discussions in democratic life. In the final analysis, a democracy is not just a mathematical exercise where you count how many people are there, how many votes a given party can get. A democracy means also deliberating and talking and checking that things work properly. So we need this somewhat obsolete ingredient, which is the word discussion between various citizens, between various intermediary bodies. Marie-Lise, you mentioned the discussions that must take place between the social partners and the government. Ileana mentioned the importance of multiplying the areas of dialogue. If we want to increase the number of discussions concerning the planning, the land planning, we must involve populations of diverse origins. They must be able to get together and deliberate. In my work, I've looked a lot at that issue of discussions. These discussions are the ones that enable us to make our own opinion. Thanks to these discussions, we can get rid or reduce the fear of other groups that we may have. So above and beyond the remedies mentioned here, there is a role to be played by political parties to lead actions in the field to multiply or to these discussions with the people in the field. And I believe there's also a role to be played by companies and corporations. And I turn towards all of you who work in companies, because companies are one of the latest places where you can interact every day, when you have to respect people who have a different opinion from yours. Usually your neighbors, your friends, your family have the same opinion as you do. But when you get to your company, you can meet with people who can have a different opinion, and companies can be one of the places for these discussions. And I invite you to think in practical terms how you can encourage very respectful discussions to discuss about different opinions. Thank you very much for your presence.
Bonjour à tous. On va pas tarder, si vous voulez bien vous reprendre place. Alors, les nouvelles technologies.
So novel technologies, the future of industrialization. We're going to be discussing this matter at this round table. A few years ago, digital technologies, new technologies were YouTube, Uber, Netflix. The topic raised by Robert Gordon consisted in saying that these new technologies will not serve industrialization or even growth. So we'll start with this paradox. Are new technologies today something different? What are they? And how can they support or encourage industrialization and in the long-term economic development? What do we have at stake? Digitization in general, new technologies. Will they increase productivity? And what gains in productivity will take place in the industrial sector more than in other sectors, for example, like services? That's the first major challenge. Second challenge, we have this technological revolution. Is it a source of economic development? Will it lead to growth and economic development throughout the ecosystem? And then finally, we have an ensuing question: what public policy should be introduced to support all this? If we can prove the positive answer to the first two questions. So, what can economists tell us about these challenges? First of all, we have to bear in mind the fact that the distinguishing between industry and services is a false idea for all sorts of reasons. Industries can outsource a lot of their production, and this can then appear in the accounts under services or other industries. And these new technologies actually mix together the dividing line between industry and service, because the industry of the future produces services as well. That's the first important point you have to bear in mind. When we talk about industrialization, we're not talking about making a car, but all sorts of other sectors too. Second point that I want you to bear in mind. The share of industry in GDP in France is quite low. It's about 11 to 13%. Industrial full employment is 10 to 15, 12%, 15 for Europe. Some industries, however, account for a lot of R&D. 60% of R&D takes place in industry. So what counts is not so much the share of industry per se, but to what extent it shores up the whole ecosystem, will be a source of growth in other sectors. And third point, we'll talk about this later on. This is something economists say quite loudly. Policies of the future will not resemble the policies of the past. We can't choose an industrial champion that states should then finance. That would be a major nonsense. But governments must help institutionally to build up this ecosystem, for example, through standards, a flexible regulations, and support for innovation, research, and training. So special forms of teaching. So these are the major challenges which we'll look at in greater detail. Thank you very much, Maya. That was very clear. 60% of R&D takes place in industry. Whence the importance of new technologies in industry. And the other highlight, I think, in what you said is the fact that the border between industry and services, well, you can find this in the INSEE figures, but the border keeps shifting. There's industry and services in industry. I'll very briefly introduce our panel. We have the honor to welcome Doris Berghofer, who is president of Siemens. That is a huge industrial group. She's the boss of activities in France. Mathieu Flamini, some people knew him in a previous existence. He is an outstanding entrepreneur and industrialist. He is the boss and co-shareholder of GF Biochemicals. We'll talk about that later. Philippe Maillard is the boss of Amphi, which is a leader in risk control in industry. Just a minor anecdote, the Amphi group is a group which is some years old now. Gustave Eiffel, when he made the Eiffel Tower, asked Amphi for expert advice as to whether what he was building would weather time or whether the workers would fall to earth because the beams wouldn't hold up. So it's a very important industry. Jean-Marie Mognetti, you're also an outstanding entrepreneur. It's an amazing story, that of coin shares. Here we're talking about cryptocurrencies. You are the boss of a company. Well, it's a bit complicated. It's listed in Sweden. It's located in English. You're French, but anyway, it is a leader in. It's a management company which specializes in cryptocurrencies, and we'll see this later. It has a link with industry. Jacques Pomereau, we know you well because the group you run is called Inetum. Everyone has heard of GFI, less so Inetum. It's a very big group. I think it's called ESN now. It provides advice in technology in many different countries, 28 countries. Thousands of engineers work for industry. You lie at the heart of services and industry. And then on my right, we have Jean-Luc Robert, who is the president and CEO of Kiriba, which is a wonderful adventure. Kiriba is the first French unicorn. It was set up in the 80s. Now we're in 2023. And it's one of the biggest French fintechs. I don't know whether you define yourself in that manner. Kiriba is a dashboard that companies, whether they're big or small, can use, and it will tell you, thanks to a special SaaS software, it will tell you where your cash stands. And cash is of paramount importance given the number of crises we've just weathered. It's very important in the industry. Doris, I'll give you the floor, perhaps, as you are really a huge industrial group, Siemens, for decades now. You have done a lot of R&D. Could you tell us today where things stand? Do you have the feeling that things are speeding up? And you might give us 2 or 3 examples of technologies which are revolutionizing our industry today. Thank you for the invitation. The Siemens Group was created 175 years ago. Well, apart from Saint-Gobain, you are one of the leaders, one of the oldest companies. 70 billion euros turnover. 10% is spent on R&D. That is over 5 billion euros. That's quite a substantial sum of money. We have 300,000 employees, half of whom are in Europe, and we are active in 3 main sectors: industry, infrastructure, and transport, responsible for 75% of world emissions. So what's our role, our part? To bring the real world and the digital world together, make them converge in order to meet the challenges of our society today. Now, what does this mean? We take real assets, buildings, plants, electricity grids, and we're going to connect them in order to use the data and do the right things with these data, analyze the data in terms of compliance, and then do more complicated things like predictive maintenance, for example, or go even further and create digital networks. Could you explain to us what this means? It's cropped up often in our conversations. Could you explain to us exactly what a digital twin is? Well, for example, before you build a plant, you can create a digital twin. You can create the buildings and the production lines and simulate them. And this makes it possible before you even put the first machine in the plant. This enables you to see how you should align the various production tools, how you should bring them into service, how you should repair them to make sure things are secure for employees, to enhance productivity as well. Then you install things, and you can constantly optimize using artificial intelligence. There's some wonderful examples of this. It's not futuristic, it already exists. We need to give time for all the speakers. A huge group. Well, it's quite impressive, the figures that you've given us. Siemens is a gigantic company, kind of mastodon like that. Can it really innovate? Or is it only small structures, startups that can do so? And we have a certain number represented here. Are they more nimble? How can you create a link between these two worlds? We deeply believe that this can only work in an ecosystem. We have created a platform called an accelerator. It's a digital platform. The idea is to onboard partners, including startups, which are nimble and which can innovate. And then we co-create solutions together. That lends visibility to these startups vis-à-vis our customers, and it makes things move faster for our customers. So there's great complementarity here. I only very briefly presented your company. Could you explain to us exactly what you do? You're an industrial startup. You're 100% industrial, 100% startup, and what you do is probably very complicated, but it's readily comprehensible. How do you work with the big industrial groups? Good afternoon, everybody. We talk a lot about reindustrialization and about the energy transition. I'd like to talk to you about an industry that's not very well known. It's called petrochemicals. Petrochemicals, what's that? Well, shampoo, deodorant, household cleansing products are based on oil derivatives. Now, of course, we're embarking on an energy transition. We have regulators who regulate these products from the petrochemical industry, and then we have the consumers, people like me who know more and more about what's happening and who want to use daily products that are more sustainable and safer. With biochemicals, what we do is to replace these ingredients from petrochemicals, which are oil derivatives, by biosourced ingredients. Agricultural waste, for example. We work with big groups in chemicals. And the idea is to make safer, more sustainable products using all these derivatives. You provide advice to the big groups. You're involved in their R&D. Are you co-owners? How do things work? Well, we began 13 years ago. We're not as old as Siemens. We are pioneers, I would like to say. We are innovators, challengers. Our core business is technology. We have about 150 technologies on different markets. We produce biosolvents, for example. We produce products for cosmetics. These are all your clients, yes. We work with big groups so that they can speed up this energy transition, and the idea is to have more sustainable, safer daily household products. Thank you very much. Philippe Maillard, A few words about what you do. I summed up things in a simplistic manner. So you have one foot in services and one foot in industry. So what do you think about this border, this dividing line between industry and services? People say you need to reindustrialize, we depend too much on services, or vice versa, etc. Well, thank you. Good afternoon. We are over 150 years old. We're a bit younger than Siemens. It's interesting to bear in mind our history. Industries in the Mulhouse area asked engineers to guarantee two things: that industrial production, mainly based on steam, would be able to work, and at the same time, this would not endanger the health of the workers and employees in the plant. That's our history. For 150 years, we've been working with the industry as it has evolved over time. The idea is for people to be able to safely go about their work. We provide support, we inspect, we control, we ensure standards and norms are respected, regulations, be they European or national, or even voluntary regulations. The goal is to build trust and ensure that I can buy this product in a trusting manner because it's been tested and checked. I can use or enter this or that building or school because it has also been checked. So this confidence is very important. We've been doing this kind of work for the last 150 years. We are at the border between industry and service. You employ only engineers? Yes, engineers, technicians in all different areas. I'd like to share 2 points with you. First of all, we talk a lot about digital and the digital risk. Everyone is thinking about the digital revolution, which has an impact on everyone, including industry. But don't forget that today there are technical challenges, major ones. Do you think that a big airplane manufacturer knows how to store hydrogen in a plane? Do you think that not far from here at ITER, we're trying to reproduce solar fission? Do you think that we know how to do this? Well, technology is evolving. Techniques are evolving. We're studying and developing these new technologies. Engineers, startups, and big groups are doing all this work. And it behooves us to support them so that all this can be done in a very safe manner. I think it's very important to recall this. Let me give you another example. Hydrogen. Do you think that hydrogen is an easy thing? People talk a lot about hydrogen. A hydrogen plant entails certain risks and hazards, so you can't do this in any old way. You can't use this in any old context. So we have to provide this kind of support. Qualify the risks, define the risks. It's important for the entire ecosystem. We have a single goal. We want to ensure that all these transitions, the digital, environmental transitions, take place in a world based on trust and in a safe manner. Well, this does fascinate me indeed. You have supported many industrial revolutions, and your function, your mission is still there. And in Mulhouse, one can wonder about steam energy. Same thing for hydrogen today, in fact. Not to mention mini nuclear power plants. Well, these mini nuclear power plants, well, there's an industry that is in bad odor, which people sometimes say is dangerous, namely cryptocurrencies. You are the king of cryptocurrencies. Tell us about it. You're not 150 years old, but history has speeded up a lot. We have cryptocurrencies. In comparative terms, you are almost, it's almost as though you're 100 years old. Cryptocurrency is something new in finance. Here we're talking about an industry will end up shifting to cryptocurrencies completely. It's a vast subject, but you have just 2 or 3 minutes. It would be interesting to hear what you have to say because you're at the heart of this revolution. Well, yes, it is true that we are in bad odor to a degree, but I'm not a big bad wolf, and what people say that this ecosystem began in 2008 with the subprime crisis, when some people said it was necessary to find a solution to change the status of things. We had to find an asset management system that would enable the man in the street to have a democratic access to this new product. Not just, it shouldn't be just for an elite, but for everyone, to put this in a savings plan and make the most of these cryptocurrencies. These products, I'm talking about ETFs, or the equivalent of ETF in Europe. These are products which have created the most millionaires in terms of investors since they were introduced in 2015. It's a complicated crown to wear. We could talk about this with the boss of Amundi, or we could talk about this with the Central European Bank. What one notes is that people often say cryptocurrency is something negative, but you have to look at the industrial underpinnings of all this. First of all, you have the financial side of things. All the people here today are saying that this new industrial revolution is bound to exist, but the financial system is 1.0. We talk about 4.0, but in finance we're talking about 1.0. The systems are still based on old versions of things which need to be updated, and things aren't moving forward. Companies today are trying to enter the digital era with old solutions, particularly in terms of financial services. We have this blockchain technology, and that makes it possible to automate things more. Things can be more transparent, more centralized. So it's a technology which has been used increasingly in industry in terms of authentication. Yes, look at government projects in R&D. There are projects to decentralize the land registries, also banks, in terms of the creation of values. How can you issue a financial product through the blockchain? Société Générale has a huge project in this area. Thank you very much. Sorry to cut you short. It's my unfortunate task to have to ensure that people stick to time. I'm the timekeeper. Jacques Proudhon, don't introduce yourself. I wanted to give you the floor. You lie at the heart of industry because you work for industry as a services company. Tell us about the technological advances, the right technologies. We've talked about digital twins, for example. What awaits us in the future? What have you observed? What did your missions focus on today? We have 27,000 engineers, developers, experts who work in a number of countries for industry in particular. I was thinking about the title of this discussion, New Technologies, Future of Industrialization, and I thought to myself, well, one should talk more about incorporation. Without new technologies, the industry won't have a future. Let me explain why I'm saying this. We have a number of customers today, and what we note is they want to roll out massively artificial intelligence. We'll talk about this later. But above all, data. What are we witnessing? We have a big plane manufacturer, a manufacturer of turbines, which use data on a massive scale. That's the case of Siemens too. There's a very strong development in robotization. Why? Tesla is succeeding so beautifully because robotization, the extreme robotization, provides for gains in productivity. And if you visit a conventional thermal engine car plant and electric car plant, they have nothing in common. In terms of industry, what we observe currently is the rollout on scale of augmented reality. These glasses which enable you to make a digital twin, and this makes it possible to speed up maintenance, speed up training, and boost productivity. In terms of digital twins, just to wind up, what about the role of the state? In the building sector, Buildings also often have a digital twin. The penetration is 5 to 10% of buildings in France, buildings and plants and so on. In China, it's 100%. Why? Because the government has made it obligatory some years ago to have a digital twin as soon as a building is designed. The new revolution, and I do say revolution, is generative artificial intelligence. I'm not talking about an incremental progress, I'm talking about something that's truly revolutionary. Thank you very much. Jean-Luc Robert, you are a bit like Jean-Marie. You have revolutionized financial services with a technology which was a revolution in terms of software and the cloud. You developed rapidly in this area. Will there be incremental leaps like this? What about artificial intelligence? I agree with this entirely. We were created in 2003. We enabled companies, whatever their size and whatever their geographic area, to manage and optimize their cash, their investments, their working capital fund, and optimize their working capital. We have lots of customers in different fields. We have Siemens, GFI, Tesla, Amazon as customers, and this is a SaaS function. You can connect very quickly to a service which we manage, and you have to register, of course, you have to subscribe. We lie at the heart of the technological revolution. We have these new technologies, NFTs, cryptocurrencies, artificial intelligence, the idea being to optimize all these scenarios. Artificial intelligence helps to improve this service as well. Yes, the quality of service and the functioning, the simulations. Leaders, people who work in the financial departments can thus take very quick decisions on an almost instant basis. Well, technologies have a cross-cutting role to play. They lie at the heart of the whole of this sector, petrochemicals, cash management. I have two questions when it comes to our academic participant. One you can answer quite quickly, and the other everyone can think about. In Europe, are we really trailing behind the Chinese and the Americans, for example? We talked a lot about the Biden plan for AI, protecting the market and so on. And two, if this is true, or even if it isn't true, what are our governments doing? Should they put up more money? Should they regulate, deregulate? And I would like to ask your opinion on that, of the other speakers too. First point, Europe and the rest of the world. Well, in fact, we have a very good report which gives us all the figures and which shows that when you look at the highest added value industries, you find them not in Europe but in Asia and in the US. There's R&D and new technologies in Europe, but in industries with less added value. So there's a real challenge here. We need to catch up. Why? In the field of digital technologies, there are network effects, cumulative effects when it comes to advances. And if you start to fall behind, well, that's simply not an option. In industry, you can lag behind and then catch up. But here, this is not the case in digital technologies, because digital technologies create a whole ecosystem. They have a snowball effect. It's a technological leap forward. So this is a huge challenge today. Of course, we talk about finding hope again. We must say that we are lagging behind a little bit. If you look at digital matters abroad, if you look at the GAFAM, they're all American. They have a Chinese equivalent, so there is a lot at stake when it comes to public policy. on a European level. I think we need to build up regulations that foster innovation, support innovation, so we have a form of sovereignty and independence in all these areas which are crucial. Thank you, Maya. So, Doris, perhaps, and then we'll let everyone react as they like. But it might be worthwhile to hear the viewpoint of the president of Siemens. Okay, we talk often about champions, but Siemens is a global champion. Do you have the impression that you are lagging behind the Americans and the Chinese?
If you try to look at the glass as being half full rather than half empty, France also faces a challenge, but also has an opportunity. It's one of the most industrialized countries in Europe, below 50%, while Germany has only lost 20%. So now we can leapfrog technologies and all the new plants that are being built, all the startups can do this, can come back using the new technologies we just mentioned. There's a great example called Chamadex. I don't know if you heard about that. The French president went to visit them in Ardèche a few weeks ago. They're producing sports shoes in Europe again. This no longer existed. They use digital twins, augmented reality, etc. And they're very proud about that because they can be highly competitive in a country such as France. And we support them. So Siemens is also an actor in huge industrial projects like cells with super factories being built in Europe. Does anyone else have a different view, or do you all agree, or is someone upset with what's happening? We have to find solutions. Well, as concerns fintechs, I believe there's a generation of entrepreneurs in France that is present and which was not present 10 years ago, and we now see some global leaders in the world of in the area of machine tools, in the area of in the field of artificial intelligence, and we can very well aim towards a leadership position. The public authorities are doing a lot for that. Yes, absolutely. They do a lot. We're not China. We can't use the model of China, which would be difficult to replicate in Europe. We know that the US is a weird capitalism because the state is extremely present, especially through public markets. I would like to know what you feel about our interventionism, knowing that we're not the US either, because we're a more partitioned market. But what is the right method? If you were a minister of the industry, what would be the right method to support the industry? Do we need more money, more regulations, more of a framework? If I turn to those who are not so loved by the regulatory authorities, Jean-Marie, what do you feel? We're not ill-liked, we're just regulated everywhere. It's not that people don't like us. There's a bad elements about this sector, but we are progressing. Well, traditionally, France had a planning policy. This tradition has disappeared, but it enabled the development of motorway infrastructures, railway infrastructures, a lot of networks. If SFR and France Telecom became giants, it's due to the fact that there used to be a policy for that. The issue that will take place for the digital technologies and the cryptocurrencies is, first of all, the national element. And if you go to if you look at microprocessors, we talk about mining farms, calculation farms, where are they located? And another point is the electricity and the energy consumption. So because of all that, we'll very soon end up with a question of who controls what. Very funny example, very strange example. A company called Fireblock, extraordinary at technological level, but it's an emanation of the 8200, which is an emanation of the Israeli army. So if you're the the U.S. regulator, there are privileged relationships with Israel, so no problem. But if you're a regulatory authority in Hong Kong or in Frankfurt, how do you envisage this connection? And which is why we need to have European champions. We're lucky enough to have Ledger in France, which is a French unicorn in terms of cybersecurity. We need more, but first of all, we should encourage talents to stay, not to leave, and we would need to have the public policies to support these industries. Xavier Niel worked on the cloud without success, and others have done so. Okay, Philippe Maillard, you wanted to react, and Mathieu, do you feel supported, or do you feel big enough to react? So first of all, I wanted to answer your question. If we look at a topic which is very much of the essence, the duration for relocating a plant, when we talk about reindustrialization, we see that in France we need 3, 4, 5, 6 years for a plant to be set up. And when you look at the files, it means that we manage about a third of the classified installations in France. What we forget is the level of demand that we have created collectively in terms of biodiversity, environment, standards, and you have to be able to support that, because we made these choices because they represented a will of a desire of our society. But when you look at the time it takes, you remember you need fauna, flora carried out, surveys carried over a year. And there used to be a time when this didn't happen. It's the syndrome of the yellow and green toad that is crossing the sector. Well, what I'm saying is that it's a demand of the public authorities, and today it may delay the setting up of a new plant. But if you take care of a file correctly, you can set up a plant in 2-3 years by respecting the regulations. So it is also possible to do it in 2-3 years and to make the process a bit more agile for the reindustrialization without necessarily entering into complicated discussions to know if you have to relax the law. Yes, it's becoming complicating because we are constantly having new laws to try and make things shorter. I wanted to seize the opportunity of having with us someone who's both French and German. Don't you think there's a cultural issue? Because the French, they love the industry, but not when a plant opens close to their home or within 10 or 100, even 100 kilometers of their home. Don't you think there's a cultural issue? Some people export because they always did so, the Dutch, the Germans, and others used to be more of a rural population. Do you feel that? What I've felt over the past 50 years, France has become deindustrialized. So my generation and the generations before, so the closing of plants. So this meant a lot of unemployment, and there were a lot of negative connotation with the industry. And it's absolutely necessary to reverse this perception, And this is what's happening in France. Politics are giving priority to this topic. There's a lot of initiatives along these lines. We need more women in the industry, for example, because nothing works without talent. France has created a new collective movement to attract women to the industry with mentoring, etc. So we have to change the image of the industry and the role of SMEs, the famous Mittelstand. And this was part of the daily life of the Germans and no longer of the French. So, Mathieu, did you want to react to the role of the public authorities? Did you need them? You created an industrial project from scratch with the new technologies. It's an industrial startup company. Did you get any support? Did you need the support? Well, first of all, if you want to innovate, you must be able to take risks and you must be brave or have some courage. And more, the French government is really playing according to the rules of the game and betting on the industry of the future. So if you don't mind, I'm going to talk in a positive manner. In France, you have something called research tax system. So you can recover up to 43% of your research. A while ago, the companies used to develop in other countries and they developed the research here, but they scaled up in US or in Asia. Now they scale up here. If you talk about the BPI, if you talk about France 2030, we have a lot of systems that enable us to develop our production units in France. So this is important. Things are changing, and it's important to realize that. Personally, I left France. I lived between France and other countries, but we have to change this mentality. We have to change the stereotypes when people say building a plant in France is not possible. It's not true. France is becoming more and more competitive at global level. So you work in tens of countries. It's interesting to hear about your vision. You are an expert. You're at the very core of industrial and technological innovation. Are there major differences? Is anything happening in France above and beyond the political speeches? Because there is a consensus and it's very difficult to find someone who doesn't talk about having some sovereignty. It's true that the speeches as to that have been reversed. In real terms, how do things happen when you have to advise a client as to whether they should open a plant in France or Germany? It probably happens. Are we really more and more competitive? Yes, absolutely. For the past few years, we have seen an acceleration of the possibilities with new procedures and a large demand. But when we talk to our clients, the main topic is AI, generative AI, and the context around that. The state can very strongly accelerate industries, but it can also hinder it with overly constraining and limiting standards. Why is generative AI absolutely fascinating? Let me give you an example. I was at Google's in California 3 weeks ago. They have the best tools in the world. They have set up these tools at a large scale and gained about 20% productivity, even though they had already the best team in the world. In the chemical or computer industry, you can talk about at least 20% of improvement in productivity. But where it's fascinating is for the industry and the R&D teams. Some major industries, especially in the US, have deployed these have scaled up the use of these new tools and gained up to 40% productivity. So you can imagine if you come out with a molecule or a car 40% faster than your competitors, it's great. Do you think it's not the case in France? Well, I co-signed an article last weekend. There are some projects at European level which are being built with an approach, a precautionary approach, which may sound legitimate, but which is dangerous for companies, and they may thinking, okay, I'm going to create my AI company abroad because then I can have access to talents and to tomorrow's technology. There's really, we have to encourage sovereignty and the relocation of industry. I don't know if it's true. It might be interesting to hear your opinion. Do you think there's a barrier in Europe because we had the GDPR, which was a problem for data processing? Very often we are trying to be nice people and we're a bit naive as compared to the others. Do you think this is true? Is it an explanation to our lagging behind? No, it's not an explanation. About regulations up till now, the economists felt that the digital systems should not be regulated because it was a novelty and changes had to take place by themselves. 4 or 5 years ago, there was a change of vision because control these huge digital systems were becoming important. So we introduced the DSA and DMA directives that are what is called the gatekeeper directives, controlling access to market. But now there's a true political stake there. We have to balance privacy, the respect for your privacy, your private data on the one hand. These are legal elements, because citizens must be protected. And the other thing is innovation. We must make sure that the data are open and exchangeable because they are the very basis of the economic system now. So there's a challenge to balance these two elements, protecting the data while introducing innovations linked to these data. I'm not sure I understood where we stand as far as AI is concerned. Regulators try to follow the technologies. How do you envisage the evolution of things? Because we were talking about productivity gains, there's a fear of loss of jobs in the service industry, the so-called white collars, because we know that these will be more impacted. So the political authorities have to decide on these regulations. What is your position about things? Some people have explained their position in the US, in Europe, not always the same, in fact. Well, it's very interesting because before generative AI, we used to say digital things are nice, they're changing our life, but we've been hearing about threats to jobs, but we aren't seeing this in practice. We heard about the polarization of work, saying that the digital technologies were a threat to people with intermediate competencies, but not threatening the highly qualified or the very little qualified. In fact, generative AI have changed things totally. First of all, because there's a hope of gain of productivity, which is a true revolution now, but there's also a concern for a large part of our employees, even the highly qualified ones. I saw research saying that the most threatened jobs were the legal jobs people who are super qualified. But also for health, there's another panel on health. With predictive medicine, a lot of jobs are being threatened. So what will regulatory authorities do? They have to arbitrate between jobs and technological progress. Well, I feel the discussion we should have is about distribution and redistribution. The true issue is not really jobs, but the productivity gains. So if this impacts the equity holders, it's not going to work. So we have to see how the gains of these generative AI are being redistributed. I guess in your company, for example, some jobs can be threatened or at risk. How is your job going to evolve? Well, it's a creative destruction. So what we do better and faster will enable us to gain some markets with the same teams, and therefore to serve more clients with the same teams. Apart from that, at the same time, there are new jobs being created in the computer services because a lot of people will realize that large language models, LLMs, will be in great numbers, so we'll need to replace one by the other to be always at the top. We will need some specialists for the interface. We'll need people to check the quality of responses, the parameters. If I take my own example, I was trying to recruit someone the other day. Usually I talk to my HR manager, I give him or her the profile, we discuss for 2 or 3 hours. There I used our own generative AI robot that we have at Enitum, and I did this on my mobile phone for 1 minute. So I'm not saying that this is going to disappear, but we'll have more time for other tasks that have an added value or will lead to a capital gain. So we can't close now, but I would like to turn to my neighbor, Jean-Luc Robert. He's the best informed man in the world, better than Christine Lagarde, because in his cloud he has the cash situation of thousands of companies. So I'm going to try and pick his brain to get some information about the situation. Do companies have cash? There's a lot of investments. We were talking about the 4 billion invested by Siemens every year. A lot of money will have to be invested in the new technological revolution. I guess you're not allowed to centralize everything or to talk about everything, but if you look at things in real time, what can you tell us? We don't see the data of the companies, but we see the volumes that are being exchanged. Several trillions of cash are being exchanged on the platform. And our main issue is the issue of data and sovereignty. And the main issue in the evolution of the cloud is that. So our data are anonymous, so you can't see them, but we see that there's an acceleration of the cash flows and things are picking up speed. So it means that the economic activity is supported. So everything is okay, we can continue increasing the interest rates. Well, I guess a time will come when there are other ways of funding companies, and this will lead to other sources of potential funding. I would like to leave the last word to Mathieu Flamini. I believe you're from Marseille. You're not far away from here. I'd like to have your opinion about reindustrialization of neighborhoods. We've heard that a lot. I'd like to know where your company is located. Do you really believe that we can rebuild a French industry? Will there be other Flaminis cropping up everywhere? And as we only have 2 minutes left, I'll let you conclude maybe. Well, 2 or 3 words as to what you were saying earlier about the regulator. I don't think we are facing the first industrial revolution. We've faced others, and we managed to reinvent our world. Second thing, we say that 85% of the jobs in 2030 are not yet known. So the best way to defend yourself is always to attack first. And one thing which is very important for the industry, it's important for the that the regulators should try to protect the citizens and the environment. For example, for plastics, there's a new law that says that by 2030, for all plastic objects, you must have at least 30% of recycled plastic. Nowadays, in the fuel you use for your cars, about 14% is biofuel. So this is generating the new industries. Yes, it's a way of reinventing our industry. And to finish, we're presently discussing with the French government and the teams in the region to help people relocate in the south and to help relocate in the south because it's a territory that has a huge potential, and we hope we can very soon take part in this economic movement. Well, thank you all for your patience, and it was fascinating. See you soon.